The Red Reflection, the Silver Bridge Protocol. My name is Gage. I work as a structural inspector for the West Virginia Division of Highways. It's a job of rust, rivets, and cold steel. Most people see a bridge as a way to get from point A to point B, but I see them as living things. They groan under the weight of the world, they expand in the heat, and they hum in the wind. I'm used to the isolation. Most of my inspections happen in the gray hours before dawn, when the traffic is dead and the only sound is the Ohio River churning below. It's a professional routine. Climb the girders, check the tension bolts, and log the oxidation levels. 3 nights ago, I was assigned to a routine safety audit on a remote suspension bridge near Point Pleasant. The night was heavy, the kind of thick, humid dark that feels like it's clinging to your skin. The air smelled of damp limestone and river silt. I was about 60 feet up on the south side cable anchorage when I heard it. It wasn't a metallic sound. It was soft, a heavy, rhythmic thump, 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 like a large wet rug being beaten against a wall. It was coming from the very top of the main pylon, tucked away in the shadows where my headlamp couldn't quite reach. I paused, my boots vibrating slightly against the steel grating. The wind had died down, but the bridge was shivering. Not the usual sway of a suspension cable, but a fast, nervous tremor. I clicked my lamp to its highest setting and aimed it upward. At first, I thought it was a piece of shredded tarp caught in the wind. It was large, maybe 7 feet tall and dark gray, huddled against the steel beams. But it wasn't flapping. It was shivering. Then it unfolded. 2 massive leathery wings spread out, blocking out the stars. They didn't look like bird wings. They looked like stretched skin, veined and heavy. But it wasn't the wings that made the breath catch in my throat. It was the eyes. They weren't on a head. This thing didn't seem to have a neck. 2 huge, hypnotic orbs of burning crimson were set deep into its chest. They didn't reflect my light. They seemed to drink it. They glowed with a dull internal heat, like the embers of a dying furnace. It didn't screech. It didn't move toward me. It just sat there, vibrating, and I felt a sudden, sharp pain in the back of my skull. A high-frequency hum that made my vision blur at the edges. "Dispatch, this is Gage." I whispered into my shoulder mic, my voice shaking. I think we have a structural anomaly on the south pylon. Something is perched up here." The radio didn't hiss. It didn't crackle. A voice came through, but it was my own voice, distorted and slowed down, as if it were being played from a warped record. "Gage, look at the rivets. They're all going to pop." I looked down at the steel beam beneath my feet. The heavy grade 8 bolts were starting to weep. Not oil, not rust. A thick, black fluid was oozing from the metal, and the bridge began to hum a 3-note tune I'd heard in every nightmare since I was a child. The vibration in the pylon shifted from a mechanical hum to a biological thrum. I could feel it in my marrow, a low-frequency pulse that made my stomach churn. I started to climb down, my gloved hands fumbling against the freezing steel. The metal felt wrong, no longer cold and rigid, but slightly soft, as if the bridge were becoming feverish. That black fluid oozing from the rivets began to pool around my boots. It was viscous and smelled of old batteries and scorched earth. I glanced back up, just for a second. The creature hadn't moved closer, but it had leaned forward. Those crimson eyes were pulsing now, glowing brighter with every labored breath I took. Gauge. Gravity is a habit. My own voice warped through the radio again, slower this time, sounding like it was being dragged through gravel. Break the habit. I ignored the voice and gripped the ladder, but as I shifted my weight, the steel rung didn't just bend, it stretched. It elongated like pulled taffy, turning silent and rubbery. I nearly slipped, my safety lanyard snapping taut with a crack that echoed across the dark water below. I was dangling 60 feet above the Ohio River, and the bridge was beginning to scream. It wasn't a sound of wind or traffic. It was the sound of thousands of microscopic fractures opening up all at once, a high-pitched, crystalline shriek that made my ears bleed. I looked at the main cable. The thick bundles of galvanized wire were fraying, not snapping under tension, but unspooling, as if the very idea of a bridge was being undone by the creature's presence. The Mothman, if that's what it was, spread its wings fully now. They spanned the entire width of the pylon, shadow black against the starless sky. The pain in my skull spiked. A vision flashed behind my eyes. The bridge collapsing, the screams of families in their cars, the icy water swallowing the headlights. It wasn't a memory, it was a premonition, heavy and inevitable. I managed to swing my body back toward a solid girder, my breath coming in jagged sobs. I reached for my emergency flare, my fingers numb and clumsy. I needed to see. I needed to break the hypnotic hold of those red orbs. I struck the flare. The brilliant red magnesium light hissed to life, reflecting off the black fluid on the girders. In the sudden glare, the creature flinched. Its wings wrapped around its body like a shroud, and for a heartbeat, I saw its silhouette clearly. It wasn't a bird, and it wasn't a man. It was something from the uncanny, a glitch in the architecture of the world. I didn't wait to see more. I slid down the last 20 feet of the access ladder, my boots hitting the asphalt of the empty road deck with a dull thud. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the screaming steel. I looked toward the north end of the bridge. My truck was parked there, its hazard lights blinking. But standing in the middle of the road, right next to my cab, was another figure. It was wearing my high visibility vest. It was holding my clipboard. It turned around, and even from 50 yards away, I could see the twin reflections of red fire where its eyes should have been. The asphalt beneath my boots felt like wet clay. Every step toward my truck was a struggle against a world that was losing its rigidity. The bridge's safety lights weren't just flickering anymore. They were pulsing in a deep, rhythmic red, matching the heartbeat that was thumping in my ears. I kept my eyes on the figure by my truck. It stood perfectly still, the clipboard in its hand angled exactly the way I hold mine when I'm checking for tension loss in the main suspension. It wasn't just a mimic, it was a mirror. Gauge. The load is unbalanced, the thing by the truck said. Its mouth didn't move. The sound came from the dashboard speakers of my truck, drifting through the open window and across the empty road deck. We need to trim the weight. I didn't stop. I couldn't. Behind me, the Mothman on the pylon let out a long, mournful vibration. It wasn't a sound, but a pressure that rattled the teeth in my skull. I heard a bolt pop, a sharp metallic crack followed by another and another. The bridge wasn't collapsing from gravity. It was being unmade by the frequency of that thing's presence. I reached the halfway point when the air temperature plummeted. My breath began to bloom in front of me in thick, gray clouds. The smell of scorched earth intensified, mixed with the metallic tang of blood. My nose was pouring now, the red droplets hitting the dark asphalt and sizzling as if the road itself were hot.
"Get away from my truck!"
I screamed, but the wind swallowed the words before they could reach the north end. The figure by the truck didn't flinch. It slowly raised its hand and pointed toward the river. I looked over the railing. The water wasn't black anymore. It was glowing with a dull bioluminescent crimson, reflecting the eyes of the creature perched above me. In the glow, I could see things rising from the silt-old cars, rusted machinery, and things that looked like skeletal hands made of rebar, all reaching upward as if the river were trying to join the bridge. I lunged forward, the flare in my hand sputtering its final sparks of magnesium. I reached the truck, and the figure, the me that wasn't me, simply stepped back into the shadows of the trailer I was hauling. It didn't vanish. It merged with the darkness, its orange vest the last thing to fade into the gray. I dived into the cab, fumbling for the keys. The ignition felt soft, like the plastic was turning into wax. The engine turned over with a wet, gurgling sound, the dashboard lights bleeding a dark, oily purple. I looked in the rearview mirror. The Mothman was no longer on the pylon. It was hovering just 10 feet behind my rear bumper. Its wings were silent, barely moving, as it stayed perfectly level with the truck. End quote. Those red eyes filled the entire mirror, drowning out the hazard lights, drowning out the world. "Drive, Gage," the radio whispered, my own voice now sounding like a choir of 1,000 whispers. "Drive until the steel forgets your name." I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. The tires spun on the melting asphalt, throwing up sprays of black, viscous liquid as I tore toward the end of the bridge. The bridge behind me felt like it was folding into the river, a symphony of screeching steel and popping rivets that faded as I hit the solid ground of the riverbank. I didn't look back. Ya ha ha, ya ha ha. I kept my eyes locked on the white lines of the road, but the asphalt still felt like it was breathing. The hazard lights on my dashboard were no longer amber. They stayed a solid, bruised crimson, pulsing in time with the ache in my skull. I drove for 3 hours, pushing the truck far beyond its limits, until the industrial silhouettes of Point Pleasant were replaced by the rolling, indifferent hills of the deep West Virginia woods. I pulled into a gravel turnout near a shuttered gas station, my hands shaking so violently I had to pry them off the steering wheel. Silence. The kind of silence that feels like a physical pressure against your eardrums. I reached for my inspection logbook on the passenger seat, intending to record the structural failure, but the leather cover felt warm. When I opened it, the pages weren't filled with my neat, professional notes about oxidation and tension bolts. The pages were covered in black, oily smears that looked like charcoal drawings of wings. And in the center of the final page, written in my own handwriting but with a jagged, frantic pressure, was a single date. December 15, the date of the Silver Bridge collapse. A soft thump landed on the roof of the cab. I froze. The smell of scorched earth and wet limestone filled the small space of the truck. I slowly looked up at the sunroof. Two massive glowing red orbs were staring down at me through the glass. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just watched, their heat beginning to crack the tempered glass. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I realized then that the Mothman isn't a monster you escape. It's a frequency you tune into. It doesn't cause the collapse. It is the collapse. It is the manifestation of the moment when the steel forgets how to hold, and the world decides to break. I quit my job the next morning. The official report on the bridge audit came back as inconclusive. They said I must have had a localized seismic event or a panic attack. They found no black fluid, no melting asphalt, and no missing rivets. But I can't look at infrastructure anymore. When I cross a bridge, I don't feel the stability of the girders. I feel the hunger of the river. I see the red reflection in every window, in every puddle, in every flickering taillight. I live in a small cabin now, far from the rivers, far from the steel. But last night, while I was sitting by the fire, my old work radio, the one I'd kept as a souvenir, crackled to life. It wasn't plugged in. It had no batteries. "Gage," the voice whispered, sounding like a choir of thousands. "The inspection isn't finished. We found another crack." I looked out my window into the dark woods. There, perched on a branch of an ancient oak, were two red embers. They weren't moving. They were just waiting for the next routine to break.